It was Thanksgiving Day, back when I was just 10 years old. We lived in this old farmhouse out in the countryside, about an hour's drive from the nearest town in upstate New York. The house had been in our family for generations, with creaky wooden floors and a big kitchen that smelled like wood smoke from the fireplace. Every year, my parents hosted the family dinner there. It wasn't fancy or anything, just a bunch of relatives coming together to eat turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and all that stuff. My mom would spend days getting ready, baking pies and setting the long table in the dining room with paper napkins and plastic cups because we didn't have enough fancy dishes for everyone. That year, it was me, my mom, my dad, my older brother Jake, who was 15, my grandparents from both sides, a couple of uncles and aunts, and some cousins. About 12 of us in total. The adults were laughing and talking about work and the weather, while we kids played board games in the living room. The sun had gone down early, like it does in November, and the house was lit up with lamps and string lights. My mom hung around the windows outside. It was pitch black, with only the sound of wind rustling the bare trees, and maybe a distant owl hooting. We'd finished the main meal around 7 p.m., and everyone was just hanging out, picking at leftovers, or watching football on the old TV in the den. That's when the doorbell rang. It was weird because nobody ever came to our house unannounced, especially that late. My dad got up from his chair, wiping his mouth with a napkin, and went to answer it. I was sitting on the floor playing with my toy cars, so I could hear everything from the hallway. "Who is it?" Dad called through the door. A man's voice answered, muffled, but clear enough. "Hey there, it's Cousin Ed. Aunt Marie invited me. She said it'd be okay to drop by late." Dad opened the door a crack, and I peeked around the corner. There was this guy standing on the porch, maybe in his 40s, wearing a plain brown jacket, jeans and boots that looked muddy from the dirt road. He had short, dark hair, a bit of stubble, and a friendly smile. But something about his eyes seemed off, like they were too sharp, scanning everything. He wasn't carrying anything except a small backpack slung over one shoulder. "Cousin Ed," Dad repeated, sounding confused. "I don't think we've met on which side of the family." The man chuckled. "Oh, from Marie's side, you know, the distant branch. We connected at that family reunion a few years back in Buffalo. She mentioned the gathering here and said I should come if I was in the area. Traffic was killer though, that's why I'm late." Dad hesitated, but then Grandma chimed in from the dining room. "Marie invited him." "Well, where is Marie anyway?" "She was supposed to be here hours ago." That was true. Aunt. Marie was my mom's sister, living in the city about 2 hours away. She always came to Thanksgiving bringing her famous cranberry sauce, but she hadn't shown up. And when Mom tried calling her earlier in the afternoon, it went straight to voicemail. We figured maybe her car broke down or she got stuck in holiday traffic. Cell service out here was spotty sometimes. The man Ed nodded, like he knew all about it. "Yeah, Marie told me she might be running behind. Said something about stopping for gas, but hey, I don't want to impose if it's a bad time." Dad glanced back at the family, and Uncle Tom, who's always the welcoming type, waved him in. "Nah, come on in. Plenty of food left. Maria will vouch for you when she gets here." So they let him in. I remember thinking it was strange because nobody really knew him, but adults do that sometimes. Trust people if they seem nice enough. Ed shook hands with everyone, introducing himself like he'd been part of the family forever. He knew weird details too, like he asked my grandpa about his old fishing boat, the one he'd sold last year, and mentioned the exact model. Grandpa's eyes lit up. "How'd you know about that?" "Marie must have told you." Ed just smiled. "Yeah, she chats about everyone, keeps me updated." He even knew about my brother's soccer team, asking Jake about that big game they lost in September. Jake was surprised, but laughed it off. "Man, you got the inside scoop." Mom offered him a plate, and he sat down at the table, eating slowly and joining the conversations. I didn't like him right away. He kept looking around the room like he was memorizing where everything was. The family photos on the walls, the keys hanging by the door, even the layout of the kitchen. But nobody else seemed to notice. They were all too busy talking and passing around dessert. As the evening went on, things started feeling off. It was around 9 p.m. now, and the party was winding down. People were getting ready to head home or crash on the couches. But then I noticed everyone acting strangely. My mom, who's usually super organized, started slurring her words a bit, like she'd had too much wine, but she doesn't drink. She giggled at nothing and dropped a fork on the floor without picking it up. Dad was staring at the TV with a blank look, not even reacting to the game anymore. Uncle Tom kept rubbing his eyes, saying he felt dizzy, and my grandma nodded off in her chair, which wasn't like her. She's always the last one awake. Jake was the worst. He was sitting next to me on the couch, and suddenly he just zoned out, mumbling about feeling hot and cold at the same time. The cousins were yawning nonstop. Their eyes were glassy. I asked Jake if he was okay, but he just waved me off. I'm a fine kid. Just tired. But I wasn't tired. I felt normal. See, I hadn't eaten much of the dinner. I'm a picky eater at 10. Hated the turkey because it looked dry, and the stuffing had onions in it, which I can't stand. I'd mostly snacked on some crackers and cheese from the fridge earlier, and a piece of pie that Mom set aside for me before the main meal. Nobody forced me to eat the big stuff because they know how I am. While everyone was acting weird, I saw Ed moving around the house like he owned the place. He'd slip into the kitchen when no one was looking, or wander into the hallway. At one point, I followed him quietly because I was curious. He was in the living room, going through coats, hanging them on the rack, checking pockets, and feeling around. Then he went to the den and rifled through drawers, pulling out papers and looking at them under the lamplight. Nobody noticed. They were all too out of it, slumped in chairs or staring into space. My heart started pounding. This wasn't right. Why was he snooping? And why was everyone so loopy? I remembered watching those true crime shows with Jake. Sometimes the ones about strangers who aren't who they say they are. I got scared, really scared. But I was just a kid. What could I do? Yell? They might not even hear me properly. I decided I had to call the police. The phone was upstairs in my parents' bedroom, an old landline because cell service sucked out there. I waited until Ed was back in the dining room, pretending to chat with Uncle Tom, who was barely responding. Then I slipped away, tiptoeing up the stairs. The steps creaked a little, but the TV was on loud enough to cover it. In the bedroom, I closed the door softly and picked up the phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered right away. 911. What's your emergency? I whispered, trying not to cry. There's a man in our house. He says he's family, but I don't think he is. Everyone's acting weird, like they're sick or something. He's looking through our stuff. She asked for the address, and I gave it. The full thing, including the rural route number. She told me to stay on the line, but I heard footsteps downstairs. So I hung up and hid under the bed just in case. Those 15 minutes felt like forever. I lay there in the dark, listening to the muffled voices below. Ed's laugh stood out. It was too normal, too calm, too wrong. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance getting closer. Blue and red lights flashed through the window curtains. There was a knock at the front door, loud and official. From the police. Open up. I crept downstairs. Dad was trying to stand, but he wobbled. Ed was nowhere in sight. The back door was open a crack, letting in cold air. He must have slipped out. When he heard the sirens, 2 officers came in. One, a tall guy with a mustache. The other, a woman with her hair in a ponytail. They looked around and saw everyone dazed. I ran up to them. I'm the one who called. That man, he did something. They listened to me, then radioed for backup. Paramedics showed up soon after. An ambulance pulled up the gravel driveway. They checked everyone's vitals, heart rates, pupils, all that. One paramedic shone a light in Mom's eyes and frowned. Looks like sedation, possible drugging. The police called in more help, a detective and some techs, and they tested the food leftovers on the table. Turns out the turkey gravy and the mashed potatoes had traces of some kind of sedative mixed in, like strong stuff. The kind you get from a pharmacy, but not supposed to use like that. Benzodiazepines or something. I heard the word later. It makes people sleepy, confused, and easy to control. I was the only one not affected because I hadn't touched that food. The pie I ate was from earlier, untouched. The police figured Ed must have spiked the dishes when he was in the kitchen alone. Maybe in his backpack? He could have brought the drugs, powdered or liquid. But why did they think that? Maybe he was planning to rob us. With everyone drugged, he could go through the house, take valuables, wallets, jewelry, or worse, maybe hurt someone. But I interrupted it by calling. They searched the house and yard with flashlights, but Ed was gone, vanished into the woods or down the road. No car parked outside. He must have walked up or hidden it somewhere. Then came the part about Aunt Marie. The police tried calling her again, but it went to voicemail. They sent a unit to her apartment in the city. When they got there, the door was unlocked, which was weird because she always locked it inside. They found her in the bedroom, tied to a chair with thick ropes around her wrists and ankles. Her mouth was gagged with a dishcloth stuffed in and taped over. She was scared, but okay. No injuries except a bump on her head. When they untied her, she told them what had happened earlier that day. Around noon, she was getting ready to drive out to our place. She looked out her window and saw a man lurking by her car in the parking lot. Tall, dark hair, brown jacket. He was trying the door handles, peeking inside. She grabbed her keys and went out to confront him. "Hey, what are you doing?" But when she got close, no one was there. The lot was empty. She turned to go back inside, and that's when someone hit her from behind hard on the back of the head. She blacked out. Woke up hours later, tied up in her own room. The guy must have dragged her inside, used stuff from her kitchen to bind her. He took her phone, turned it off so no one could track it. Why? The police figured he targeted her to get info on the family. Maybe he'd been watching her for days, hacking her email or something. Simple, like listening in on calls. Aunt Marie was chatty on social media, posted about the Thanksgiving plans and family stories. He pieced together details to impersonate a cousin. They never caught him. Searched fingerprints in our house and hers. Nothing in the system. No cameras in our rural area or on her lot either. His real name has just disappeared. Maybe he tried it on other families. Or maybe he got scared off after that. Thanksgiving changed for us. We lock doors now, even in the country. And I always eat what everyone else eats. No more picky stuff. This didn't happen years ago. It happened just last month. It's something that still keeps me awake at night, wondering if I did enough, or if I just hesitated too long. My fiancé Tim and I were driving back to New England from West Virginia. We had gone down for Thanksgiving with my extended family. It was supposed to be a nice, long weekend, but it turned into a disaster. Our 1-year-old son Leo had been fussy the entire time, probably sensing the stress, and the weather had been awful. We cut the trip short by a day, just to get back to our own beds. We had been on the road for about 6 hours, and we were all absolutely drained. Leo had finally fallen asleep in his car seat, which was a small miracle. We were somewhere in rural Pennsylvania on one of those long stretches of highway where you only see trees for miles. We needed gas and real food, not just chips from a gas station. We pulled off at an exit that looked half abandoned. There was a gas station that had definitely seen better days, and a diner next to it called Patty's Place. It looked like the kind of spot that locals went to, which usually meant the food would at least be decent. It was around 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, so the diner was mostly empty. It had that typical smell of old coffee and fryer grease, comforting in a weird way. We grabbed a booth near the window so we could keep an eye on our car. Mostly out of habit, we ordered coffee immediately, just to feel human again. There were only 2 other tables occupied. One had an elderly man reading a newspaper, and the other way, in the back corner, had a couple with a young girl. I didn't pay them much attention. At first, I was just happy not to be moving at 70 miles an hour. But after a few minutes, the vibe in the room started to feel heavy. You know when you walk into a room right after people have been arguing? It felt like that, but it was completely silent. I glanced over at the corner booth. The man was big, wearing a trucker hat low over his eyes and a heavy canvas jacket, even though it was warm inside. The woman was thin, with nervous hands that kept tearing up a napkin into tiny pieces. Then I looked at the girl. She must have been about 9 or 10 years old. She had dark hair that looked matted at the back, like it hadn't been brushed in days. She was sitting stiffly, perfectly still, staring down at a plate of untouched French fries. What caught my eye was how she didn't fit with them. They looked rough, worn down by life. She looked, I don't know how to describe it, other than well kept underneath the messiness. Her jacket looked expensive, a nice bright pink puffer coat that stood out against the drab gray and brown clothes of the adults. "Tim," I hissed, leaning across the table. "Don't look right now, but that family in the corner is weirding me out." Tim took a sip of his coffee and casually glanced around the room, pretending to look for our waitress. "The one in the back? Why, just watch the girl," I said. We sat there for a few more minutes, eating our burgers. I kept watching them out of the corner of my eye. The girl hadn't taken a single bite. The man said something to her. I couldn't hear what it was, but his body language was aggressive. He leaned in close, and she flinched. It was a tiny movement, but I saw it. She shrank back into the vinyl booth, then her eyes lifted and locked onto mine. It wasn't a normal look. It didn't have that bored curiosity kids usually have when they stare at strangers. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with red. Suppose she had been crying recently. It was a look of pure, desperate terror. It sent a cold spike right through my chest. I stopped chewing. She held my gaze for a second, then quickly looked back down at her plate as the woman nudged her sharply with an elbow. "Did you see that?" I hissed to Tim. "Yeah," Tim said. His voice is lower now. "I don't like the way that guy is hovering over her." Suddenly, there was a loud clatter. The girl had dropped her fork onto the tiled floor. The man sighed loudly, throwing his hands up in annoyance. "For God's sake, Jenny, be careful," he snapped. It sounded rehearsed, like he was saying it. For our benefit, the girl mumbled a sorry that was barely audible. She slid off the booth to pick it up. Since we were a few tables away, she had to bend down in our direction. As she reached for the fork, she turned her head slightly toward me. Her hand, the one not reaching for the fork, was hidden from the couple by the tablecloth. She gave a tiny, frantic wave. It wasn't a hello wave. Her fingers were splayed and shaking, like she was trying to push something away, or maybe get my attention without them seeing. It lasted half a second before she snatched the fork and scrambled back into her seat. My heart started hammering. "Tim, she just signaled me under the table. Are you sure?" "Yes, she's terrified. Something is absolutely wrong here. That's not her family." We watched her for another minute. She dropped the fork again. This time, the man grabbed her arm as she tried to move, leaving it. He growled heavily enough that we heard it clearly across the quiet diner. She froze, then slowly sat back. But as she did, she looked at me again. She mouthed something. It was just one syllable. I couldn't read lips perfectly, but it looked so much like help. I felt sick. I looked at my own baby, sleeping in his carrier on the table. The thought of someone taking him, of him being that scared 10 years from now, made me want to throw up. "We have to do something," I told Tim, my hand are shaking. "We can't just leave. If we're wrong, we look like idiots. If we're right and we do nothing..." "Okay," Tim said. He's always better in a crisis than I am. He took a deep breath. "I'm going over there. I need a reason. I need to get close enough to hear them, see how they react. What are you gonna say? You can't just accuse them of kidnapping." He patted his pockets. "My phone is almost dead. It's at like 4%. I will ask for a power bank. It's stupid, but it's normal. Be careful," I said. Tim stood up. I watched him walk casually across the diner. He didn't look threatening, he just looked like a tired dad. He stopped at their table. The man looked up immediately, defensive. His shoulders tensed, and he practically glared at Tim. "Hey, sorry to bother you folks," Tim said, putting on his best friendly guy voice. "We've been on the road for hours, and my phone just died. My charger is buried in the trunk. You wouldn't happen to have a power bank I could borrow for 5 minutes, just to make a call?" The man didn't even let him finish. "No, we don't have one." His tone was final. Most people would at least check their bags or say sorry, politely. He just wanted Tim gone. Tim didn't move. He stood there for a second too long, just looking at them. The woman wouldn't meet his eyes. She was staring intensely at her coffee cup. The girl was looking at the table, tears silently dripping onto her jeans. Tim took a gamble. It was stupid, brave, and reckless. "Cute kid," Tim said, nodding toward the girl. "She looks just like you." "Is she yours?" The reaction was instant and violent. The man slammed his hand on the table, and the silverware jumped. "Mind your own damn business, pal," he shouted. The woman looked up, terrified, but not of us, of the man. "It's time to go," she muttered, already sliding out of the booth. "We're leaving," the man snarled. At Tim, he stood up, and he was huge, at least 6'4". He grabbed the girl by the upper arm hard enough that I saw her wince. She didn't make a sound, though. She was too scared to cry out. "Wait," Tim said, backing up a step, his hands up. "I didn't mean to offend you." They didn't wait for a check. The man threw a crumpled $20 bill on the table, not nearly enough to cover their 3 meals, and practically dragged the girl toward the door. As they passed our table, the girl turned her head back one last time. Her face was a mask of pure despair. She knew we had tried, and she knew it hadn't worked. That look is going to haunt me until the day I die. The bell on the diner door jangled aggressively as they shoved their way out. "Call 911, Tim said, rushing back to our table now. "Get their license plate." I was already fumbling with my phone. I ran to the window, but the diner had those half curtains that blocked the view of the parking lot unless you stood right up against the glass. By the time I got a clear view, a beat-up blue sedan was already peeling out of the lot, gravel spraying everywhere. I couldn't read the plate. It was covered in mud, probably intentionally. I dialed 911. My voice is shaking so badly. The operator had trouble understanding me. At first, "I need to report a possible kidnapping." I stammer. "We're at Patty's place on Route 6. They just left." A blue sedan covered in mud. A man, a woman, and a little girl who looked terrified. The operator told us to stay put and that an officer was on the way. We waited and waited. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Could I have done something else? Should I have blocked the door, screamed fire, or done anything to keep them there? It took 30 minutes for a state trooper to arrive. 30 minutes. They could have been 20 miles away by then, down any number of back roads. The trooper was calm, almost frustratingly so. He took our statement, writing everything down in a small notebook. He asked us for descriptions: white, male, 40s, heavyset, baseball cap, canvas jacket, white female, thin, nervous, brown hair. The girl was about 10 with dark hair and a pink puffer jacket. Tim recited, his jaw tight. The waitress, an older lady who had been in the kitchen during the confrontation, came out. She confirmed they hadn't paid the full bill and had acted strangely since they arrived. "Do you have cameras?" The trooper asked her. "Just one over the register and one by the door," she said, "but they're old." We all crowded into the tiny back office to watch the grainy footage on a small monitor. The trooper fast-forwarded to when they came in. The quality was terrible, but you could see them enter. The man had a firm grip on the girl's shoulder the entire time. The trooper paused the video. When the girl looked up at the camera by the door, it was blurry, but her face was visible for a split second. He let out a slow breath and pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a minute, then held the screen up next to the monitor. It was a missing persons poster. "Is this her?" he asked. The photo on his phone was clearer, a smiling school picture, hair brushed neatly, looking happy and normal. But the eyes were the same. "Oh my God," I said, grabbing Tim's arm. "Yes, that's her." The trooper's calm demeanor vanished. He immediately grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, confirming visual ID on the missing juvenile. Jennifer and Adam, last seen at the diner on Route 6 30 minutes ago. Suspect vehicle is a blue sedan. Older model, possibly a Taurus or Impala. Plates obscured. Put out a bolo immediately." He looked back at us. "She's been missing for 3 months. She disappeared from a Greyhound bus station in Ohio. Her parents have been going out of their minds." I felt tears running down my face. She had been right there, 3 feet away from me. "Did we do enough?" I asked the trooper, desperate for some kind of reassurance. "We tried to stall them. You did what you could," he said. But he wouldn't look me in the eye. He knew, just like we did, that we had been too slow. We had to leave, eventually. We gave them our contact info and got back in our car. The rest of the drive home was dead, silent. Neither of us turned on the radio. Leo woke up and started crying about an hour later, and I just climbed into the back seat and held him, sobbing into his little neck while Tim drove. I've checked the news every day since then, and I've searched for Jennifer Adams' name constantly. There hasn't been a single update. They know who she is now. They know what the car looks like, but they haven't found it. Every time I close my eyes, I see her dropping that fork. I see that tiny, desperate wave under the table. We were so close to saving her, but we were worried about being rude. We were worried about being wrong, and because of that, she's still out there somewhere with them. I was the one who pushed for the drive through the mountains. My sister lives on the other side, and every Thanksgiving we either fly or take the highway. Around this year, I wanted the quiet road. I told my wife the views would be worth it. I told the kids they might see snow on the peaks. I checked the car the night before. Fluids, pressure, and tools in the back. The spare looked fine. I told myself we were set. We left late morning on Thanksgiving Eve. The sun was weak, and the air felt dry. The kids had blankets and headphones. My wife had a thermos of coffee that kept fogging her glasses when she sipped it. I drove with the window cracked and the heat at my feet. It was one of those roads that rises in Steps Valley. Farms, then pine, then gray rock and thin air. Radio stations came and went. My phone said no service every few minutes, and then offered 1 bar long enough to load nothing. Somewhere after a green sign that said Summit Creek 12, the car thumped hard to the right. I eased off the gas and felt the wheel pull. The pressure light came on. There was no shoulder beyond a narrow edge and a drop of 50 yards ahead. A gravel drive opened on the right. A faded sign hung crooked on a pole. Pine View Diner, the arrow below. It pointed to a single-story building with a long front window and a chrome door. The parking lot looked pitted and cracked. We rolled in with the hazard lights ticking. The diner looked like it hadn't served a plate in years. The letters on the glass were a pale ghost of breakfast lunch pie. Old flyers were taped inside, sun-bleached to the color of cardboard. A newspaper rack leaned empty near the door. Weeds poked through the asphalt like wiry hair. No cars, no sound, just wind or hazard tick, and the soft hiss of the tire giving up. "Stay in the car," I told everyone. "I'll do this quickly." I pulled the trunk mat and lifted the foam tray. I grabbed 2 wheel chocks and slid them behind the front tires. I cracked the lug nuts before jacking. They were tight. I put my weight on the wrench until each one snapped. free, with that short, dull pop. The air smelled like dry pine, and old oil gravel stuck to my knees while the jack climbed. I looked up at the diner again. That was when I noticed them. They were not there when we rolled in. I'm sure of that. I had scanned the windows like you do with any strange building, just a quick look for lights or movement. Now, behind the glass shape stood 4, maybe 5. They were at different spots along the long window, not pressed to it. A few feet back, still facing forward. Hey, I called out before. I knew I would. My voice came out flat in the open air. We have a flat. Do you have a landline? No one moved. My wife leaned forward from inside the car. What? In there, I said. The kids turned and looked through the windshield. Do we know them? My son asked quietly. I stood and waved. Hello? I took a step closer to the glass and then stopped myself. The jack was lifting the car, and I had left. My wrench on the ground. Rule 1. Don't walk away while the thing is up. The wind carried a dry whistle between the diner and the trees. I stayed by the car. The figures could be mannequins. That was my first idea. Old diner decor. Some retro display. They could be cardboard cutouts from a promotion. The shapes weren't quite right, though. The heads were the right size. The shoulders were narrow. One looked like a kid. The glass had a faint dirt film and stripes where someone once cleaned it with a towel long ago. It made their edges fuzzy. Do you need help? I called again. We're good, but do you have a phone? The faces didn't press against the glass. They didn't turn away either. Just that small line of people spaced like they were waiting for something and forgot what it was. Jack groaned and held. I took the lug nuts off by hand. The flat was the right rear. A sidewall tear that looked like a bite. A clean cut, the kind you don't repair. I pulled the wheel and rolled it to the trunk. The gravel sounded loud under it. You all right? My wife asked through the cracked window. Yeah, I said. Just strange. What is? Inside, I said. They're just standing there. She pushed her glasses up and squinted past me. That place is closed. Maybe they got stuck, too. I said I didn't believe it. The lot had no fresh tracks but ours. I lifted the spare and lined it on the studs. The sidewall sticker said 60. PSI Max. I slid the rim home and spun the nuts on finger tight. I moved in the star pattern with the wrench, snugging, not torquing, then lowered the jack until the tire kissed the ground and tightened it again. Something clicked behind me, a pebble. A small sound, like a shoe on loose grit. I turned fast enough to make the wrench slip in. My hand. The lot was empty. The only thing moving was a torn flyer on the diner door flapping against the inside of the glass. I looked down at my feet. There was a thin, bent strip of metal lying near the rear bumper. It had short nails set into it at an angle. 3 of them were snapped or bent. One had a shiny tip with black rubber on it. I picked it up. It was a homemade spike strip, not long, maybe a foot. It could sit flat and disappear on gray asphalt. The nails would rise just enough. My mouth tasted like pennies for a second. I walked up to the glass and held it up so the people could see it. It felt like a dumb act, even as I did it. Did you put this out? Here, I said. Not a shout, just a plain question. A few feet from the window. They didn't move. It's hard to explain the feeling of being watched by something that doesn't blink. Your head says mannequins. Then your head argues with itself. Because why would there be mannequins in an abandoned diner? Your body doesn't want to stand with its back exposed too long. My wife called my name twice this time. Hey, can we go? Almost, I said. 2 minutes. I bent to grab the jack handle and felt a draft on my neck. I stood back up and looked at the door. The torn flyer had stopped flapping. The chrome handle sat still, with a chain and a padlock looped through the inside latch. On the glass near the bottom, there was a print low down. It was either a kid's handprint or where someone pressed a rag. Years ago, the hazard lights ticked, and the sound felt too loud. I finished lowering the jack and slid it out. I torqued the lugs in a star. Then one more sweep. My hands were shaking enough that the wrench slipped and jammed my knuckles. The pain helped. It grounded me. I put the tools back in the tray, and the tray back in the trunk, and slammed it behind the glass. The figures stayed in their places. One of them was at the far left, where a menu board hung crooked. I wasn't sure it had been there before. I tried to remember the exact count. 4, 5, 6. Trying to memorize something while your brain runs ahead does not work well. I realized my wife had the same doubt. I could see it in her shoulders through the windshield. She mouthed, "How many?" I shrugged. I looked at the right edge of the window where the reflection of our car sat in the glass. If you stared there, you could see your own face past it. A pale shape might be your head, or it might be someone else's. I hated that. I could not tell. My son cracked his door to speak to Dad. He said in a small voice, "I don't like them." "Close the door," I said softly. "Seatbelt. We're leaving." I walked to the driver's side and made myself go slow. I did not jog. I did not look back until I had the door open. When I looked, my eyes went to the small figure. It had the height of a kid. It stood exactly as the others, arms straight, head forward. The face was pale, either skin or a mask, or the way old glass eats color. "Should we tell someone?" my wife asked when I shut the door. "Yeah," I said. "We will troopers, ranger, whoever we find." First, I put it in drive and rolled to the exit, and the gravel popped under the new tire. My hands were damp on the wheel. As we turned, the headlights swept the front of the diner for a split second. The beam slid over the glass and lit the room inside like a scene. Colorless and flat in that beam. 3 faces caught light. The small one was smooth, like plastic. The others were not. One was a man with a beard that had gray in it. His eyes reflected like a cat for just a blink, a trick of the angle. The third face was a woman with hair pulled back. Her mouth was a little open, as if she were about to speak and changed her mind. We rolled onto the road. I set the cruise at a speed. My kids would call it too slow. We passed a mile marker with bullet holes in a snow gate. The trees closed around us again. A truck came the other way and did not flash or wave. No one spoke for a while. The road bent along a cliff and then dropped through a cut where a rockfall fence hung with small stones, like a net catching fish. My phone beeped with a bar. I tried 911, and it spun and dropped. A few minutes later, we hit a wide turnout with a map board and a vault toilet. There was a blue payphone box there with a metal handset and a dial tone that sounded like it had been cleaned this morning. It felt like a joke, but it worked. I called the highway patrol and gave them the mile markers, the name of the diner, and what we saw. The dispatcher was calm and slow, like an elementary school teacher reading a menu. "Pineview," she said, typing. "That's been closed for a long while. We've had calls. People think they see movement. We'll send a unit to check the tire hazard. You said you found a strip with nails. Please don't handle anything else if you find it. Are you safe to continue?" "Yes." I said, "We're on a spare." I tightened everything. "Please keep it under 50, she said. "We'll have a patrol swing through. Happy Thanksgiving." No siren followed us. No lights came up behind. We reached the pass, then the snow line, then the long drop west at an overlook. We could see a town lit like a circuit board. My wife touched my arm and asked if I wanted her to drive. I said I was fine. At my sister's place, the kids ran ahead, and the house smell hit us. Cinnamon, bread, laundry, and the dog. The others were already there. Coats on hooks, boots by the door. Everyone talked at once. I set the keys and the phone on the entry table. I washed my hands and saw the scrapes across my knuckles. When my brother-in-law asked about the drive, I said we had a flat near an old diner. He asked where. I said the name. He gave the same face you make when someone says a street you drove as a teenager. That place is closed. He said, it has been forever. I said, I knew. He said, kids break in. You get weird things in the windows. I slept on the couch that night. Not because there wasn't space, but because it felt good to be near the front door with a deadbolt. I woke at 2 to the dog's nails clicking across the wood and a train horn far away. I pulled a blanket up to my chin and felt dumb for not turning off the entry light. I told myself that the people behind the glass were a story we would tell in different ways. For years, I told myself the strip of nails was a separate thing. I told myself a lot of things until I slept again. Morning came with the smell of onions and butter. I made coffee and took the memory card from the dash cam in our car. It was a habit I started after a fender bender 2 winters ago. The kids watched me like I was about to pull a rabbit out of a hat. We put the card in, my sister's laptop, and scrubbed forward to the part where the car turned into the lot. There was our bumper in the corner, our hazard lights making the screen pulse, the gravel plumes under the tires. There was the diner window in the dark glass, which stood dull and pale like we remembered. We paused and zoomed, and the pixels broke into little squares. It looked worse the more you looked. One frame showed what could have been a nose or a reflection of my arm. Another frame showed something smooth and round at kid height, which could have been the top of a stool or the head of a doll. The camera lens had dust in 2 spots that became a pair of floating orbs and made me angry at myself. We watched the part where the headlights swept the window. The beam turned the glass into a mirror for a split second. There I was in the reflection, standing by the door behind me. Inside, 3 faces appeared. The first had that flat plastic look. The second looked like a man's with bad lighting. The third, the one that had put my stomach in my throat, looked like a woman with her mouth open at the top of a breath. We clicked frame by frame. In one frame, the small shape was not behind the glass. It was outside on the far right edge of the image, near the chrome door, mid-step, as if someone had set it there and then decided not to. We sat back from the screen and we ran it. Again, the shape could be a camera flare, or it could be the reflection of our taillight on the chrome. It could be. My son stood and went to the kitchen. Without saying anything, he came back with a slice of toast that he did not eat. Later that day, a trooper called me back. He said they had gone to the diner. The chain on the door was old, but the windows were intact. No footprints were obvious in the dust inside. He said someone had placed cutouts in the dining room long ago, movie posters, maybe on foam board. Over time, the paper had curled, and the glue let go. He said the youth dared to go there, took pictures, and made videos. He said they had found 2 small boards with nails in them near the entrance to the lot, and thrown them in a bag with gloves. He told me he was glad we were careful. He told me if I ever had a flat again, I should stay in the car and call. I told him there was no service. He said right in that spot, there isn't. We ate dinner early. Football was on in the background. Laughter came from all directions. The kids argued about the wishbone. I kept thinking of the glass, not the faces. The glass itself, how it ate the light from our car and gave us back a wide, flat version of ourselves. A reflection is not only what you see, it's also what you expect to see. On the drive home 3 days later, we took the long highway around, no mountains, no thin-air gas stations with families and puffy jackets. At every exit, my wife fell asleep with her cheek against the window. The kids counted RVs. The road was ugly but simple. We crossed the river and kept south. The sun dropped in the rear view. The car hummed. At a big chain stop, I pulled off to check the spare and buy windshield fluid. At the back of the car, I saw the donut had left a faint chalk line inside the wheel well. Nothing unusual. I bent to wipe a spot and found a small thing caught by the frame rail. It was a metal washer with a little triangle of wood stuck to it by sap or gum. The wood had a nail hole through it, but no nail. The triangle was the color of old pallets. It could have bounced up from any road. It could have fallen from a work truck we followed. It could have been from the boards at the diner. I flicked it into the trash that night. Once we were home and the kids were in their own beds, I took the strip of nails from under the trunk tray and put it on a shelf in the garage. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because throwing it away felt like forgetting a step on a ladder. Sometimes you want proof of your own memory. Weeks passed, and the story came up with friends. They said it sounded like a prank. They said we'd scared ourselves at an empty place. I nodded. They weren't wrong. Fear needs shapes to hang on. Give it a window and a shadow, and it will make a person. Give it a person, and it will make a threat. I wish I could tell you the troopers found someone living inside the diner. I wish I could tell you we learned about a cult or a camp or a film shoot. Real life is not that clean. They put a fresh chain on the door and hauled a few boards of nails out of the lot. That was it. The people in the window stayed in my head because I gave them a place there. There's one part. One did not tell my wife until later, and maybe I shouldn't have told her at all. When I was tightening the lug nuts, I heard a phone ring. Not a cell phone, an old ring. I know that sound from my grandmother's kitchen. It came from inside the diner. It rang twice. I looked up and saw nothing move. The ring stopped. Wind hissed over the lot, like someone letting air out of a tire. Maybe the sound bounced from somewhere else. A cabin up the hill, a car on the road you can't see. Sound does strange things in the cold. It carries and turns corners. It puts itself where your eyes can't confirm it. On Thanksgiving. Now, when the family asks about that year, we drove the mountain way. I tell the same story each time. We had a flat near a place that should have been empty. People stood behind the glass. They did not move. When we asked for help, someone had laid a little trap on the road. We left. We told the right people. They went. They found signs of kids and nothing else. That's the version that fits in the space between green beans and pie. The other version only lives in the small hours. When I get up and check the front door. In that version, the small figure is outside the glass, not behind it. It stands with its arm a little out from its side, as if the elbow is stiff or the sleeve is heavy. In that version, I'm still turning the lug wrench, and the hazard lights tick and tick, and each time the light flashes, something in the window is 1 inch closer to the door.